right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 124 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I have two special guests today. Chris Black, international law expert, just returned from a conference in Belgrade discussing the war on Yugoslavia back in the 90s, I guess that was. Joining us from Campbellford, Canada. I think it's about noon there, so it's not morning for him, but it is morning for me here on the West Coast. And I got Greg Rosen from Chicago. I think he's right between, what kind of time zone is that? That's between
Central.
East Coast.
We're 11 a.m.
Yeah. 11 a.m. Central Time. So we have not had a live broadcast since the whole ordeal in Syria. And so we kind of titled today's program, The Empire Strikes Back, in reference to what's going on there. And there seems to be a bit of pessimism across the social media, the informed echo chamber, I would say, as opposed to the fake news echo chamber. But, you know, informed people are expressing some discouragement, some concern, some pessimism regarding what's going on. And, it's tough because I didn't see this coming personally. Speaking for myself, I did not see this coming. I thought Syria was strong. I thought, there was these agreements in place. And I think everybody thought there was these agreements in place. And really, people were taken aback when Erdogan opportunistically took the opportunity to, just break the agreement, the Astana agreement. And, he sent a whole bunch of troops that he had been training into Syria, and they quickly are capturing, gobbling up city after city. Very discouraging, very demoralizing. Is there any room for optimism, or is there any hope that Iran, Russia, Hezbollah seems pretty occupied, but what about Iran, Russia, maybe Yemen helping out? Any thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Well, we know many Iraqi militia units are already in Syria. Many more are coming, are on their way to join the Allied forces. Iranians are arriving. There's meetings I think in Tehran today with the Syrian, Iranian, and the other foreign minister to talk about the situation. The Russians have promised all the help they can provide. The Iranians, so I think they'll push it back, but there's going to be a lot of trouble doing it. Surprised. Well, yes, because we all thought that had more or less been settled, except for the Israeli constant attacks against Syria. But Erdogan has proved himself to be someone you can't trust about anything, and he wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
So I did hear, the best analysis of the entire situation yesterday on Danny Haifong's program. It was the second half at about the 50-minute mark. Kevork, and I don't even know his last name. It's Almassian or something similar. But he really had a superb, thorough analysis starting at about the 50-minute mark. So that analysis I shared in the description of this video. If you want to, obviously not right now, but later on for some real, it's a very multifaceted, complex situation with all the interests, all the competing interests. And I think that meeting tomorrow actually includes people from the Arab League as well. It's not just the Axis of Resistance, but I want to say maybe even Qatar and UAE, but I'm not certain. But yeah, no, it's very opportunistic. Hezbollah is tied up, with what they're dealing with. I was surprised at how quickly the Syrian army, decided to retreat. But, they didn't expect, that there was that Erdogan was going to just stab him in the back. And like the last war, starting in 2011, they ended up having to retreat to defensible borders, really,
Mm-hmm.
and so I hope there's a plan in place. I know this morning on Telegram they are claiming Erdogan is talking about taking Damascus and moving into Damascus, which that's the last stronghold. As well, maybe, I don't know. Can they retreat one more city? The Alawite majority, is there one more city they can retreat to after Damascus? I want to say they have a strong in another area, but yeah, it's worrying that that will be the end of Syria, and then you'll have this government of head chopping jihadi terrorists who are actually pretending that they're all about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And they're saying, oh no, don't worry, we're going to be a Syria for all people. That's how they're branding themselves, so the West supports them. At the same time, they're pretending to be pro-Palestine, right? They're saying that we're pro-Palestine, Assad's anti-Palestine, and so you got to support us. And there's so much nonsense on social media with these supporters of the head choppers, the ISIS, the rebranded ISIS, Al-Qaeda guys, saying that, hey, you got to support these guys because Assad is evil and we're the ones that really support Palestine. And it's just really crazy propaganda, and it's so massive and pervasive, even on social media. I was just shocked to see the amount of nonsense. It's just to think that ISIS and Al Qaeda, are the ones that we ought to be supporting, and that Assad is the bad guy and he is against Palestine and he's on the side of the Zionists. It's just obviously the opposite. So the Zionists are going to be very happy when the head choppers take over Syria, because they can either work with them and create greater Israel, or they can say, hey, look, we can't have these head choppers here, and they don't have nearly the legitimacy that Assad does, and they'll just take over whatever they want to take over in Syria to further the goal of greater Israel. So any way you look at it, people who think clearly and know what's going on are gonna be wanting Assad to maintain control over Syria. And
I go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, I don't think Russia's gonna be okay with that, right?
No, well, Russia can't lose those. They're not going to give up those bases.
Right, it's their only Mediterranean bases.
No, they won't let that go anymore. They let the bases Sevastopol go in Crimea. So I think they'll push back. But even if the worst happened and these people took Damascus, which would be pretty much the downfall of the government, those guys are not going to be remaining in charge. Turkey would then be in charge, and those guys would be dealt with. The Turks are using them now. Mm-hmm. If they use them to take power, they're not going to stay in power. That will become a Turkish province, and the Turkish army will then suppress those people. So that will be a temporary phase of the war to extend Turkish domination into the Middle East, which they would. I mean, Erdogan, he's dreaming of being Abdul Hamid II again. And if you ever watched it, because he financed that long series, which is a very good series about the last effective sultan who was kicked out just before the First World War, and how great a man he was, and how just he was, and how wonderful a place the Ottoman Empire was before the Europeans, the Americans, the British, and the French, and the Israeli Zionists broke it up into pieces. So that's his dream. But to affect that dream is going to create more chaos than the First World War in the region.
Yeah, so Erdogan, he has motives, he has interests and ambition, and so does Israel. And I think Netanyahu has this big plan for West Asia that involves trade corridors and energy corridors, and bringing in Saudi Arabia and UAE and marginalizing Iran, destroying Iran, obviously. And So I think Erdogan is he would play ball in that kind of a scenario. He doesn't mind the Zionist entity. He doesn't have any moral problem with what is that called?
Genocide.
Well, okay, yeah, genocide. But I was thinking colonialism. The colonial enterprise of Israel itself, including the genocide. He doesn't have any moral problem with that. So as long as his interests are furthered, he doesn't. He's not part of the axis of resistance. And so he's going to go along. And same with all these despots throughout the Arab world, in the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Al-Sisi. I mean, these are all just puppets that are not part of the resistance and are okay with allowing, Israel hegemony of the region as a U.S. proxy. And so,
I mean, I think Chris's idea, though, is not necessarily compatible. I don't know if Greater Israel and the Neo-Ottoman Empire are gonna.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Greater Israel. So Greater Israel has borders, and I don't think it extends into any of the territory, but it might.
Syria.
Well, I think that if Erdogan were to succeed in taking over control of Syria, then it would be used by the Americans as a conduit to attack Iran. I mean, that's the main purpose of all this war, really, is to get to Iran, and they can't get through it any other way except from the west, going east. They can't. Land troops have to go east through Syria. That's why they really want to take it. But supposing Turkey takes over, I don't think that there will then be a clash with Israel, because the two will be opposing, because the Ottomans never wanted the Zionists to take over the lands they now control. And I don't think Erdogan really does want them there either, but he works with them right now because it's in his interest to do so, but that's temporary. Erdogan's not loyal to the Zionist movement at all.
Well, he gives lip service to opposing them, but I mean, he's sending tankers. He's sending tankers full of oil to Israeli ports. They're turning off the transponders because they think that nobody can tell what's going on with their oil tankers. But yeah, no. I mean, look, if Syria falls, it's terrible for the Palestinians, for Lebanon, and for Iran. And so, yeah, you would think that Iran is not going to allow that to happen, because if they did, their position becomes weaker. Russia is not going to let that happen, because if they did, their position is going to become weaker. But yeah, temporarily, I think they're just stuck watching things, because it was, I don't want to say brilliant, but it was very opportunistic by Erdogan, and nobody was prepared for him to just so blatantly break that agreement. I think the silver lining is that if, Iran, Russia, Yemen, the resistance is able to start pushing these head choppers back, they don't need to stop at Idlib anymore. And so they can just liberate all of Syria, including the parts of Syria that the U.S. is controlling, and which is the most, the best parts of Syria, the oil fields, the wheat fields. Those are the areas that the U.S. has kept Syria from being able to enjoy. And as a result, the people of Syria have been really sacrificing, and they've been in a real bad situation. Even though they did win, the last attempt to overthrow the government, the people of Syria have still been suffering tremendously because of the sanctions. Everybody talks about the Caesar sanctions that the U.S. put in, and then their lack of access to the oil fields and the wheat fields. I'm very hopeful that it doesn't take too long before there can be some resistance, and we can see some reason for some optimism. But yeah, just this morning, Erdogan was saying we're headed to Damascus. So it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, because that's what the Russians are going to do with that is a question now. Now, if he has said that, what their response is. Let's see. Well, it says TASS says Turkey is to exert efforts to ensure a permanent ceasefire in Lebanon, but what else does it say?
Well, yeah. So Russia has
Let's talk about
this
Lebanon.
meeting.
Yeah, I mean, a
about
lot
Syria.
of commenters have been pointing out how both Russia and Iran is not blaming Turkey. Barely
Yeah,
at all.
they've been very quiet about that. That's true.
I know Kevork on the video that I was recommending earlier. He talks about how Turkey is very, very, very beneficial to Russia because Turkey is a conduit where Russia can avoid all these sanctions, and so they're able to access global markets through Turkey, and so that's just a benefit. And so it's very complex and multifaceted. And
Iran also
say that
trade.
again.
Iran too with the trade through Turkey.
Yeah. So that speaks to the multifacetedness and the complexity of the situation. And it maybe explains a little bit why, Russia is not, just denouncing full-throatedly Turkey. But yeah, it's I wish I could do better. Go ahead.
Mark Sloboda is telling a little vignette of not sure which series of meetings, but one of the meetings Erdogan was in Moscow for. Putin kept him waiting and put him in a meeting with artwork depicting the Russian Empire defeating the Ottomans.
Is that good diplomacy or counterproductive diplomacy? Who knows?
Well, that's interesting because it shows that there is a long history of conflict and friendship between Turkey and Russia. It switches back and forth over the centuries. Yeah, so they've always been this way and this way, depending on what's going on. So it could flare up.
One of the motives attributed to Erdogan was that he was asking Assad for a meeting, and he wanted to sit down with Assad. And apparently Assad rebuffed him, and Assad said, unless you agree to certain stipulations, we're not going to meet. Mm-hmm. And so, who knows how much personal animosity goes into these kinds of decision making. But I think Erdogan is trying to demonstrate to Assad that, that Erdogan has the stronger position. And, Assad is in no place to, refuse a meeting to determine negotiation, in order to negotiate things. But, Assad has, of course, morality and the law, right? Any discussion of what is right, he has those things on his side, but those things don't matter a lot in geopolitics. No. Especially when you're dealing with people like Erdogan in the United States and Israel, who it's just straight opportunism and power and seeking your own interests without any regard at all for, morality or what is legal.
Well, this operation must have been planned a long time ago, and it can't be any coincidence that it began just a few hours after the ceasefire in Lebanon was supposed to take place. And then the Israelis, I understand, began bombing the bridges in the Golan areas, so Hezbollah forces couldn't go north to help the Syrians. So that must have been all coordinated with the Americans and the Turks and the Israelis.
Well, and the other angle is to,
go ahead.
To cut the supply lines to Hezbollah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another factor to cut the supply lines from Iran for Hezbollah. But I understand there may be up to 30,000 men involved in this attack. That's quite substantial, and to organize that, to get people in place, logistics and orders and set for a certain time to launch it, that had to be planned for some time. That can't just take place spontaneously overnight.
Yeah, and U.S. involvement has been, they're saying they're not involved, but I saw video footage of an A-10, firing on Syrian positions. Who knows the validity of that image, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. So logistics, satellite imaging, keeping track of Syrian forces and where they're at.
Having Ukrainian
I'm sure,
forces in there, and having Ukrainian forces in
Right.
there, they now admit that they were brought in by the Americans. That's for sure.
And apparently
go ahead.
the Americans pushed the Israelis to accept the ceasefire at that point too.
Right. Exactly. Well, probably Israel needed it because they were being mauled by Hezbollah in the south. They were not doing very well there. And then we also have, I think at the same time, let's mention what's going on in South Korea, because that blew up at this almost the same time, just a couple of days later. We got this martial law declaration, which is still not settled as of today. And they could impose it again. And yet the Americans claim, or everybody's claiming, nobody mentions the Americans, but there's no way that could happen without the Americans being involved. Because Korea is really controlled by the main U.S. base south of Seoul, and there's no democracy there. That martial law was declared. The main reason they said they declared it was to counter pro-North Korean elements. Again, admitting that many people in South Korea support the North, and they're afraid of it. But there must have been something happening. They wanted martial law to root those out, like they did in 1980, and killed tens of thousands of people. And that failed or fizzled out for some internal reasons. I think if you watch the movie about the 1980 military coup, it's called 12/12, you can see it. It's very effective, explaining all the ins and outs of who went along, who didn't go along, and why, and what was going on. But the Americans controlled the entire thing. So with this destabilization again of Syria, now the destabilization of South Korea, what's really going on here? Why are they doing this now? There's got to be some connection with the war in Ukraine and the Americans being really defeated there. They're trying, I don't know.
I've heard two different explanations besides North Korean forces on the move, which is the first, pressure on South Korea to produce weapons is creating conflict for Ukraine. And the other is their increasing alliance with Japan is deeply unpopular.
Right.
Yeah.
But then again, the president, it was declared martial. Well, yeah, he wants to have closer relations with Japan, which is anathema in South Korea. They hate the Japanese. So. But again, nothing gets done there without the American embassy and American military approval in South Korea. So, and then they weren't worried about North Korean elements coming down south. They were worried about, they said, North elements inside South Korea are favorable to the North. And there are large numbers of people. I met many South Koreans when I was in North Korea, because most families have people on both sides of the line. And there are many up there, and they travel back and forth, or they used to.
So the mainstream media always has their explanations. So their explanation is that you've got a very unpopular conservative president in South Korea, and the people are not happy with him. And the opposition was saying that his wife had, she was corrupt. And so he was in a very bad place personally, like his personal political, outlook was not good. And so without telling anybody, he was the one that declared martial law. It was a very stupid thing to do, and he quickly undid it. But the West says they were surprised. They had never.
Well, hello,
Carlo.
Carlo. Hello.
He's
the rumors of my demise have been very much exaggerated.
Very glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Yes. Go on.
Well, it's good to see you.
It's a little beyond.
We're just talking about the Korean situation.
It's a little beyond what I wanted to ask about, but go on about South Korea.
Yeah,
I find it fascinating.
The establishment press, the Western press, that's their story, that this was something done personally by the president because of his problematic political, interests, his outlook on. He wasn't popular. So people are demanding that he steps down. There's all kinds of protests demanding his resignation. And so instead of just saying, yes, I'll resign and I'm a failure and all my policies suck, he declared martial law, essentially. But and then part of the problem also was the opposition is not happy with him agreeing to U.S. dictates and increasing ties with Japan. So being really friendly with Japan. If he falls, the new government definitely is going to distance itself from Japan in a way that he has chosen not to do because he's such a Western puppet. But that's the establishment press narrative. Now, it's true that they're a colony. They're a military, they're militarily occupied by the United States. And the United States ultimately has total political and military power over that country. And so the United States can dictate whatever it wants. And I think they dictated that, hey, you're making us look bad in the martial law. I think that's what the U.S. did dictate to them. But that, again, that's the Western explanation, and it may or may not be true. There might be other issues involved.
Well, it may be also related to the continuous meetings between the DPRK and Russia, and the release of the treaty. They released the text of the treaty the other day between North Korea and Russia. So there's no way that the North Koreans now could ever be defeated by the American forces and ROK forces. So this may have caused some internal strife inside South Korea. And also, as Greg said, many people aren't popular with the idea of South Korea giving weapons to Ukraine, which the government had talked about, and which the Russians threatened retaliation for if they did. And that may be military retaliation. So people were like, what are you doing? But the Americans are pushing that. I would suspect that the coup was suggested by the Americans, and certain people didn't quite go along with it, so it fizzled out. So then they reversed it. But there's still talk that they may reimpose it. I mean, the leader of the president's own party said it turns out he was on an arrest list. They're going to arrest their own party people who opposed their policies. So it's still not settled what's going on in South Korea. Yeah. And I don't think we're getting the full truth of it.
The Minister of Defense resigned, and he took the blame for suggesting martial law to the president. So again, this is just the official explanation, and who knows what is really going on. But officially, the defense minister said, it's my bad. I suggested that the president declare martial law, and I'm going to resign. So he resigned, and I think they put in somebody else. But yeah, they're telling everybody that it's all done. Everything's done, and no harm, no foul. Life will go on as normal. But yeah, South Korea, the people of South Korea are not happy, and they don't like to see the friendliness with Japan. They don't like to see the anti-Russian sentiment. They're for unification. Most of them want to unify the entire peninsula, and so they don't like being a U.S. military. They don't like being occupied by the U.S. military. Hopefully that could change. I mean, everything seems to be spiraling into more conflict and escalating, and what results from all this escalation, I assume, is going to be an improvement over U.S. hegemonic imperialism. It can only improve, but yeah, how is it going to look to get there? How many people are going to die? How bad is the global economy going to suffer? I mean, these are the big questions which we convene to discuss every day. But it is good to see you again, Carlo. It has been many shows. Can you tell us how you're doing and what's been going on? I mean, I know a lot of people be interested in hearing.
Well, I like to stick to the program, but the long and the short of it is, I've been undergoing a chemotherapy, and it put me in the hospital for several months, and there's three visits to the hospital, and I'm not beyond it yet, but I'm getting so bored with being hampered, living in a single room, here at the house, and I just have to. I'm trying to get back in the swing of things. Maybe I'm a little early. I get another diagnosis in a couple of weeks. I'll know a little bit more then. But for now, it is what it is. And
that's good.
Who is your insurance carrier? Is it
I don't think I'll reveal that, but
where were you on the night of
yeah. So anyway, that's the long and the short of it. I was just listening to you guys, and a friend of mine called me up, and we called him. We called him. Of course, of the discussion, he said he watches the show religiously. Something I have to admit that I have not done. I've done as much as I can, but so it kind of spurred me to think about it a little bit. So I thought I'd check in today because I feel pretty good today.
It's very good.
Thanks. It's good to see Chris. Good to see Greg.
Yeah, likewise.
What about Billy Bob?
And Billy Bob. It's always Billy Bob.
I was thinking Ian was going to join us. I know Ben was too busy. I'm a little surprised Ian hasn't made it, but because he didn't mention he wasn't going to join, and he's usually pretty consistent. But hopefully, hopefully we'll all have all four of us back together at some point. What about this? Go ahead, Chris.
We could also, as another subject, we'd raise what's happening with Trump's threats against Mexico and Canada and China, all these tariffs. It's causing a lot of consternation here. Trudeau going down to suck up to Trump at his house in Florida and beg for crumbs from him, and getting joked about making Canada the 51st province, which it really basically is anyway. And that is comments in the press here about Trudeau selling Mexico and throwing Mexico under the bus, because normally a logical thing would be for Trudeau to go and meet President Sheinbaum of Mexico and come up with a common strategy to oppose Trump and what he's threatening. But no, they go and try and make a private deal and beg from the capo for some crumbs and say, Mexico's worse than we are. What are we doing wrong? It's all Mexico's fault. So it's not going down well with Mexico. This is causing a whole series of problems in North America. And Canada's already in a recession. So a lot of people are worried about that here. And our government's continual bending of its back to the American diktats.
It's hard to imagine without any manufacturing that the United States, can really do anything economically to get out of there. What is it, 30, 40 trillion in debt. And that's why they're pushing for escalation in a war and a reset. They just want a reset because they've driven things into such a corner that's the only thing they can do is reset. And if they can, defeat Russia and then just prey on all of Russia's resources, that would be great. Or if they could do that to China. But yeah, they're in a corner and they're looking for some kind of way out. Trump's ideas of tariffs are a joke. Yeah, I mean, those aren't going to help anybody.
Except it will bring in more revenue. I mean, he's talked about dropping the income tax for certain categories of people and replacing it with excise or basically tariffs and taxes on imported goods. So they want to try and generate money to overcome their deficit through this means, I think, because it doesn't make any sense otherwise to put tariffs on Mexico and Canada when you have several free trade deals between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, which promotes the flow of trade and money, and everybody makes money out of it. So why do that? What's the sense of it?
So this would break NAFTA, huh?
Yeah, NAFTA. There was NAFTA, then that was replaced by the Mexico, U.S., Canada free trade deal or something, in which Canada surrendered its sovereignty. There's an article in there, 31, which says that Canada cannot enter into any trade negotiations or deals with any socialist country without American approval. And that really means China. So in other words, we can't do any deals unless we get Washington's approval. And our government signed that. I mean, this is crazy what they did.
Are those going to be valid if the U.S. puts tariffs on all trade?
Well, that's the deal, because that would break. That's
Yeah.
a violation of that very agreement. So that agreement would be null and void. I would think, but I don't know what sure Trump's trying to do, because
It would be great if Trump pushes Canada to increase trade with China. I mean, that would be good.
Well, and we're doing the exact opposite, because we're like one of the barking dogs with Poland. You know, we're kicking India, we're kicking China, we're kicking everybody the Americans tell us to kick, we're kicking them. So the Chinese are not happy with us. They've tried to cut exports to us now in retaliation, the same as they do in the United States with rare earth minerals and so on. So no, Canada's locked itself in to being totally subservient and relying on the American economy, when Trudeau, the senior, the father, in the 60s and 70s, tried to diversify the Canadian economy, so we relied more on many other countries in Europe and Asia, but they abandoned that about 20 years ago. And now most of our trade is with the United States.
The scuttle about the tariffs is that they'll raise prices here in America. They'll be inflationary, which is exactly the opposite of what Trump intends.
Right.
I don't think he's worried about his hardcore, because I don't think they'll respond harshly to a certain amount of inflation. I think, something comparable to what is going on in Argentina now, or that they've forced on Venezuela. It's not in the offing, but I think they're banking on just using in general the MAGA movement, and people won't notice, and that this won't be a major political concern for them. But various factions, economic factions, have various interests in what's going to happen. So some of them will of course suffer, and they will be opposed to Trump's measures, but others will benefit, and they will be, of course, in support. That's the way it generally works. Mm-hmm. So there is that going on. What I find intriguing, though, and I thought kind of throw this out as a question, is that you can see the deep state at work, and all of these, it's like Chris pointed out, the Syrian move, the attempt to re-seize Aleppo, and has been considered for a long time strategically, as all these moves were. The bombs, the explosions planted in cell phones of Hezbollah, that sort of thing. All of these sort of little surprise elements that the West has introduced into it. They're looking for a place to probe, something that will give them a footing, a new way of approaching what's obviously a dire situation, not only in the Middle East, but if you have to consider Ukraine. There's only a few weeks left to the Biden administration in Ukraine, and it seems like genuinely the situation in Ukraine is up in the air under a Trump administration. No matter how many Sebastian Gorka you have running around soiling their underwear. So it seems to me that it's coming to a kind of crescendo with the end of the Biden administration and the advent of the Trump administration, because there seems to be nothing they can sort of count on. Though I'm sure they have things that they plan that are way beyond my ability to foresee them, what they're going to do. I don't know their technologies. I don't have the information. that it's available to them. I'm not on the inside in any sense of the word. So I think it'll be an interesting couple of months in transition. And how about Georgia?
Right.
Right?
Mhm.
How about Georgia? Once again, they didn't give up on Georgia. No.
Well, although the attempted coup there doesn't seem to be going anywhere, but that's still in play, obviously. But you're right, Carlo. That's another important. They're trying to harass Russia in every which way. And then you got people, I see a lot of people now trying to downplay the Oreshnik missile system, which the Russians used a few days ago in Ukraine, as a demonstration to the West of what they could do if things go bad. And now the claims are, oh, it's nothing. Didn't really do that much. But obviously, it's something quite
few.
different. And I think we should pay attention to that. And Lavrov, if you saw Tucker Carlson's interview yet, he repeated it. They're going to do it again. They'll test it again if the Americans don't get the message. And
Yeah,
he says, I hope they got the message,
big,
but they don't seem to get the message.
They probably have to hit the supply routes in Poland for the bases.
Yeah.
That was big news with Tucker. You know, getting an interview with Lavrov, and allegedly he was trying to meet with Zelensky, have an interview with Zelensky, and that the United States said that's not going to happen.
Right.
But the Oreshnik, I think that what the Oreshnik can do is, I think it can, you know, hit bunkers that are deep underground, and I think that just means that everything that, you know, normally you're going to think that you're safe in your command and control bunkers, like Zelensky. He thinks he's safe if he goes, you know, into his, you know, whatever area they've prepared. And I think the Oreshnik just demonstrates that you're not safe. And I think that is kind of a game changer, right? I don't know any other reason that this weapon would be a game changer other than, you know, there's no place is safe. Like normally you think that, you know, I'm deep enough underground, I'm safe, but I don't think they are with this technology. And I think that's the benefit of it. But
also, if the Russian claims are correct, and the Ukrainians are not revealing what the damage was, so that makes me think the Russians are correct. But the Russian claims are that they destroyed that factory complex that they destroyed was a couple of square miles, 1.5 by 1 is like a huge area.
Okay.
A lot of it underground, and from the Russian claims, and people who support the Russian claims say that whole thing has just disappeared. So it's not just it can penetrate a single bunker, you know, a couple of 100 yards or 50 feet or something. It can destroy deep bunkers, but also large areas without the radiation effects of a nuclear weapon and the blast wave and the fire. It's a nuclear weapon without all those nasty effects, but it has the effect of destroying the target like that. So in fact, they've made nuclear war almost obsolete, except that that's where it's going to go if it keeps going.
Well, that's the only thing that the U.S. or the West could respond with in a comparable way would be nukes.
Right.
So yeah, I wish they wouldn't drive us. Why are we getting closer to that? Like, why don't we just cooperate? Why don't we just have peace through mutual prosperity and stop trying to control every place and everywhere and everyone? That's the logical approach. And that's the difference between socialism and capitalism. It's the difference between a dictatorship of the wealthy elites, an oligarchy, compared to an actual democracy where the interests of the people are what guides policy. And these are the ideologies that, you know, are there's a struggle over people's perceptions. There's a struggle to get people to adopt these different ideologies. And that's what it's all about, is allowing the oligarchy to maintain their domination control and to, you know, pursue their own interests to the detriment of our species, to the detriment of the planet.
Yeah, and they keep talking about, they're all for democracy. That's what it's all about, trying to establish democracy. Yet in France, Macron refuses to appoint a left-wing government, which the people want, because that's the vote, that's the representation in parliament. Now that government's collapsed, the German government's collapsed, but they still refuse to change the government. In Britain, you got a Labour government, but it's almost as right wing as the Conservatives, and now his popularity has dropped drastically. There's trouble in Britain. There's trouble here. I mean, they're not for democracy whatsoever. They revealed themselves. The same in South Korea. This is the so-called democratic nation. The whole claim to be for democracy has collapsed. I think the people should be aware that this is all a capitalist game where there is no real democracy. It's just a pretense of democracy, a veneer of democracy. You get to vote in your country for two Tweedledum and Tweedledee parties. That's it. That's your democracy. You're told to select. You can choose between the two people we selected you to choose from. And it doesn't matter which one you choose from. Nothing much is going to change. And in Canada, we got 5 parties, but they're pretty much the same as well. I mean, but there's more of them. The same in Europe.
Well, yeah, Mark said every 4 years the masses are allowed to vote and decide which representative of the ruling class will oppress them.
Exactly.
And I mean, that's just, the truth of that is just being, it's being revealed as, the reality that exists behind this ideological facade of liberal democracy and liberalism. I mean, liberalism, we've talked about liberalism on the program before, Greg. It's, it's the ideology of the oligarchs. And it exists to hide and obfuscate this reality of oligarchy and the fact that they hate democracy, that they oppose democracy, and socialism is democracy, but
that brings up the Cuba situation too, because the people there want their type of democracy, but the West Americans especially have been trying to crush that revolution for 70 years now, or what? Look at the situation there. It's terrible in Cuba, not because of their fault, but because of external pressure.
I heard they just had another blackout that lasted a long time.
Another day. I think they're restoring power today, perhaps, but it's not good.
Yeah, well, all these people are sacrificing, and we should be thankful and glad that they have not allowed their society to be, taken over by the imperialists, and we should be praising and thankful that they are making the sacrifice. and it sucks to see the people in Syria making the sacrifices that they're making. The people in North Korea have been making a lot of sacrifices for decades, especially after the Sino-Soviet split. But I think there's room for optimism. I hope that all these societies that have been sacrificing the most are gonna have the most to gain from these big polar shifts that are taking place from the end of Western unipolar hegemony, and as we have the ascendancy of Russia, China. They're really trying to take Iran because Iran is like the weakest link between Russia, China, and Iran. But yeah, that brings us right back to Syria. I mean, with a defeated Syria, with a defeated Assad, Iran is not going to be as strong as they otherwise would be. And it's, Trump, if anything, Trump is going to have an all-out press, a pro-Israel press. And so that's what I really think we're going to see with Trump is he's not going to focus on China, and he's not going to focus on Russia. I think we're going to see a Middle East focus. And he's probably going to resist efforts to buy hawks in his administration to really go hard at China or to really go hard at Russia. But it's going to be a very interesting 4 years. I mean, probably the most interesting 4 years in the last 75 years.
Well, we've never seen a lame duck period, anything like this that I can remember, right?
Well, Mr. Biden is just setting the stage. Like, he is handing Trump a platter of shit. He's like, you're going to have this shit to deal with. And, I think that's one of the reasons why people aren't too unhappy with the Trump presidency. And I kind of saw that happen, just in the few months before the election. I predicted Trump was going to win because as bad as things are, there's nobody that's going to do anything that's going to make the people happy. There's no way to navigate what's going on in a way that people are going to be happy with the government. And so they're happy to have a person like Trump and the whole entire ruling class can blame one person for all the fucking shit that's going to go on these next 4 years. And it's not really fair to Trump, but hey, Trump asked for it and he's got it. And so I'm going to definitely be holding him accountable.
Well, how do you account for all these crazy people he's appointing to his cabinet, like this guy Gorka? I mean, he's a vulgar, sleazy. That's one of the strangest people I've ever seen. I mean, makes, but him and his frothing at the mouth, threatening Russia. I mean, this guy's looking for World War III.
Right.
And this is Trump's national security advisor, or what? I forget his role, but something like that.
So yeah, Trump is just smart enough to have lied and picked up on the anti-war sentiment, it looks like.
Yeah.
But I think he also does the same thing to the pro-war party, right? I don't think Trump has principles. I don't think Trump is a neocon. I don't think Trump wants to engage in war. I think Trump is about himself, and he genuinely wants to do what he thinks is in the best interest of the country. Now, he's an immoral leader, and so his idea of what is in the best interest of this country is totally different from what we would think the best interest is.
How do you explain all the neocons?
Well, no, he like he's playing the anti-war party by giving us Tulsi Gabbard. He's also, placating the pro-war party, and so this is his game as a manager. You know, he puts in people across the board from all sides and placates everyone, and then he thinks he's going to be the ultimate decision maker. But he's just, he's not going to have good decisions to make, and he's also going to be outplayed again by the deep state, just like he was 4 years ago. And they're going to run circles around him, and they're going to get the policies that they want. And if he tries to oppose one of their red lines, he'll be impeached, he'll be assassinated, or he'll be marginalized, and they'll just do it anyway, just like they did the last time. So I don't know. I just don't see Trump as a warmongering neocon. I do see him as more anti-Iran than the establishment. The establishment would prefer to focus on China, maybe, and half of them want Russia, half of them want China, and he's going to be wanting to focus on Iran. And with that, he's got the backing of the entirety of the Israel lobby. So he's got a very powerful faction supporting his focus on Iran. But, this is just some random analysis, my perception, and it could be entirely incorrect. He might be,
from looking outside here up in Canada, because he looks very aggressive. I mean, but maybe in a different direction, but not that much. Threatening these tariffs against Canada and Mexico. I mean, Canada's the America's probably most loyal servant is Canada. You couldn't get more loyal than that, even more than the British. And yet now he's threatening to punish us about these pretexts about immigrants sneaking across the border of fentanyl. We're not doing anything like that. It's one of these, unless you stop, it's like if you don't stop beating your wife, we're not going to do that. It's a condition you can never fulfill because it's not happening. Okay, a few hundred people cross over, mainly Indians, like from East India, trying to get to the States for some reason. I don't know why, instead of staying here. And fentanyl, well, a lot of it's here in Canada is coming up from the States. So we could say we're going to close down our borders unless you stop importing all your firearms up here, which is causing shootings up here, which we never used to have, or drugs coming in here from the South. But our government does nothing. He's being very aggressive against one of his most loyal allies or servants, vassals, Canada. Threatening to invade Mexico, threatening Iran, threatening to smash Hamas and the Palestinians. And he didn't do anything good for Ukraine when he was president. He armed them to attack Russia.
Sanctioned Russia.
And he's threatening China all the time. I think they're going to go full bore to try and confirm their attempt to control of the whole world. They're going to go full out under his leadership. Not that they're not doing it under Biden, but I think with the defeat in Ukraine, they're getting very, very desperate. They're going to try and do some extreme things.
Well, I know, last episode we played this anti-war speech by Trump and said, and he was just blasting Biden for getting us closer than ever to World War III. and how Trump is going to bring peace. So but yeah, that's Trump. He tells everybody everything they want to hear, and then he's going to do what he thinks is best.
Well,
And
that's exactly. As his peace plan for Ukraine. I mean, it's great if that's his real intention. I applaud it. We all do. I hope he fulfills that. But what is his peace plan for Ukraine, as expressed by his representatives, is nothing more than freeze conditions that Russia could never accept. We're going to have negotiations, and Russia's going to do what we tell it. And it's just stupid that he's thinking this way.
Yeah, no, that peace plan and Mr. Kellogg being in charge of that. There's no scenario for victory in Ukraine or for peace really that the U.S. can accept. If Trump tries to accept something that is not palatable to the establishment, I think the establishment will win out and Trump will lose that struggle. And it's an open question. I mean, would Trump even do that to begin with? These are all open questions, but it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think with Kamala, like, what you're going to get. And to me, the lack of transparency and then how everything is just coordinated and organized behind the scenes, and it's rolled out in such a way that, there's no transparency at all. So Trump is genuine, and despite that he lies to everybody about everything, he's also genuine. And you can, like, a Trump press conference is just different because you can see him thinking in real time and responding to things. That, of course, he's not always telling the truth, but I think people were just disgusted with the establishment and the status quo, and that is one of the reasons why Trump remains popular, because he convinces people that he is an alternative to the establishment. And the fact that the establishment goes after him and attacks him in such an over-the-top way, this gives credibility to Trump's anti-establishment bona fides, even though we all know he's backed by at least half of the establishment, So,
Billy, you just said he lies all the time and he's genuine.
I did, and I acknowledged that.
Yeah, that's spectacular. No, I mean, it's kind of true.
True.
Yeah.
He is spontaneous when he speaks. I mean, he is very entertaining when he talks, and he's not like Biden. He doesn't know what the hell he's saying. He's intelligent enough to come out, and he's got a patter, and he's very good at it. He's like a salesman. He can smooth you over.
He's got great political instincts.
Yeah.
And lying is part of that. Lying about everything, and it's about branding, being seen by people. It's like a Rorschach test, right? Everybody looks at him and sees what they want to see because he gives them something to grab onto. Like, I love that anti-war speech. I wish Kamala would lie to me the same way. Like, why doesn't Kamala respect me enough to give me an anti-war speech? At least fucking lie to me, But Kamala didn't give me anything to cling on to. Anyway.
Does anybody do an analysis, deep analysis in the United States of why exactly the deep state, which seems to be the Democratic Party mainly, but not necessarily, it could be parts of the other parties, and why they're so against him or the Republic? I mean, what's the real reason for this? Since they really have not many differences, even in domestic policy and foreign policy, there are differences, but from outside looking in, it doesn't seem that vast to us. So why are they so against a slight change this way or that way? Why are they willing to assassinate him or charge him with all these crimes and try and throw him in jail? What's the real reason they fear him or what he represents?
It's a conundrum.
Yeah.
It's a question I've asked myself 100 times. Is it because he's essentially going to disenfranchise some of these wealthy people? Well, there's, like Billy Bob says, there's many wealthy people right behind him who are franchising him. Is it because he's basically in tune with social media as opposed to traditional media, and traditional media is so huge, essentially owned by four major companies or six, that they fear their hegemony, the hegemony of the message. It's and I don't know. Is that it? Is it if 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 Trump becomes the I don't know the standard bearer for information, does that mean that that other people of less less coinage will also move into this standard bearer position? Social media, I mean, maybe cannot be minimized, but I think I have to. I think I have to go now, guys.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Good to see you, Carlo.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll
Good to
join
see
us
you.
again soon.
Okay. I'll leave you guys on. I'll watch as long as I can.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
Yeah.
I think there's a few reasons that Trump is, that they're not there's a sizable contingent within the establishment that is not happy with Trump, and they're the ones that are always attacking him. I mean, number one, Trump seems to be a little bit too self-interested, right? He's way more self-interested than these other politicians who are happy to go along with the establishment consensus. Whereas Trump has certain ideas, and he's gonna say what he wants to say, regardless of if it is beneficial to the ruling establishment. So things like, the American media is the enemy of the American people, or the establishment media is the enemy of the American. Like, that's not an idea that is beneficial for the class interests that of the capitalist class interest. The ownership class doesn't want people thinking that the establishment press is their enemy. It's true, and Trump would say it because they were negative against him, and so he would say that, and he would say this truth for his own benefit, but it's harmful for the class as a whole. And so his lack of class consciousness, his willingness to be truthful about things if it benefits him politically, and then also their lack of able to control him. Like, he's gonna pursue policies and say things that might not be what the consensus wants him to do. So for all those reasons, they were in opposition to him, and they tried to subvert him, and they really attacked him in a tremendous way, more so than I've ever seen any oligarch politician attacked. Now, I mean, some of them, they just do suicide, or they do kill, right? I mean, JFK, of course, was attacked worse. Paul Wellstone was probably taken out, but I don't know. I think I think there's
PR
reason.
problem.
PR problem is a big reason. It's not the only one, but it's a big reason why he was opposed. But I think his share of support within the ruling establishment has obviously expanded, right? So he's made himself palatable to a much bigger share of the ruling class than previous, and that explains his winning.
Well,
but he's still Trump.
Crude and degrading of the empire, and then I think some of he doesn't even know we have an empire, which is a big problem. He thinks it's a protection racket. Like all these countries pay us for our military service.
Yeah.
No, totally, like a cluelessness there, and then a trashing of all these institutions that are designed to maintain this very fragile empire. And so, like NATO and all of our allies and the Transatlantic Alliance, and just our vassal states treating our vassals like shit.
Right,
that's
degrading Europe, right?
Yeah. So it's great for me to see that kind of stuff go on, but from the perspective of the ruling establishment, who have worked so hard to formulate this empire, and to see him trash it, that's of course one of the reasons. But the thing is, the empire is untenable. They can no longer maintain this thing, and so that's why they're okay with Trump, and because things are going to change. Like, there's just going to be big change coming. And, if they can blame one person for all the bad, negative externalities that result from this big change coming, they're happy to do that. And they know that, if they got one of their puppets, a more puppet in power, that they wouldn't be able to accomplish anything, and they would also be hated because they'd be like any of these other vassal governments that are not popular in Britain, in Germany, in France. We already talked about it. The people are sick of them. They have no support. They don't want them, and so that's one of the reasons Trump is being embraced in a much bigger way than previous.
Yeah. Obviously, he has something. He's got more support among the industrialists and financiers, whoever supports whichever government's in power. That's for sure. But then, also amazed everybody that Biden pardoned his son. I mean, why did they allow him to do that? That made them look really bad. I mean, they lose the election, then their man does that. That was very strange.
I think as the threats continue to mount and their situation as the global hegemon becomes more precarious, they're going to care less and less about appearances. And they're going to care less and less about pretending to be champions of democracy, of human rights. Like these appearances are going to fall by the wayside. And we're seeing that. I mean, we're seeing that already and more, and they're supporting a genocide, outright support a genocide. So, and yeah, again, Trump, he gave them enough. There's enough benefit with Trump that, that he got the victory. There was enough positives and not enough negatives, or I don't think he would have won, because I'm not sure, that the democracy is decided in any other way.
To your last point, is that there's less of a concern or sort of a surrender to, that it's not going to look good anymore. We are going to be cruder. We're not upholding international law. The pretenses are falling, which could be why there's more of an acceptance of Trump.
Yeah, Trump's a great figurehead for that. Because that's him too. And also, I think, again, the Israel lobby. I mean, the Israel lobby is well behind Trump because he's said enough things and he's done enough things, right? Because when he was in office for 4 years, he was very nice to Israel in a way that the establishment wasn't previous. And moving the embassy, assassinating Soleimani, dropping out of the Iran nuclear agreement. All those things were things that Israel wanted to do that the establishment didn't want to have happen, at least while Obama was president. So,
yeah, I mean, but they're not really suffering under Biden or Harris.
No, of course not. He wasn't. They were not giving the lip service. They were not as full-throated in support of Israel, like to the extent that Trump is, and that made him like Trump more. And they would even, they held up a weapons shipment once or something. I mean, they would do these real silly things that didn't affect much, but it did piss off
the 30-day evaluation of the humanitarian aid right before the election.
Yeah, who was that person on Waltz, or maybe it was Gorka or Waltz or somebody, who said they had a meeting with Jake Sullivan and they've agreed that they completely support their line, their political line and foreign policy. There's going to be no difference whatsoever. So that's right. Yeah, I think you're right. They've worked it out. They've maybe come to some accommodation, and then compromises have been made, promises have been made, and certain things are going to be done. And if he doesn't do them, then maybe they'll deal with him. If he does do them, then they'll let him sit there. Who knows?
But my guess is that that's where we're going to heat up the quickest, is with the Middle East. And I mean, obviously, you could say that's hindsight, but I was actually saying that before the whole Syria thing happened. But I worry about Iran.
I mean, I think that all of this activity could probably be understood as Trump-proofing the wars, just because they're not sure. And he's even complaining about Israel a lot. He's saying he wants the Gaza war over before he takes power. I think he's squeamish about it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's got some sentiment that is, he wants prosperity. He wants to make America great again, according to his own understanding of what that means. And he wants the American people to think that that's what he's doing. And if we're stuck in these wars, I don't think that's good for his best interest, his self-interest, but he understands that, there's some realities he's gonna have to deal with, and he can't, he's got to cut deals. But the establishment, the problem is, how are we going to cut a deal with Putin, who's winning on the battlefield? Anything that the West is going to approve of, that the ruling class is going to approve of. And so that's the big problem. And, the Middle East is related to that. It's a smaller issue. It's not as big of an issue, but it's a big issue, and it is totally related to the Ukraine issue. He's got his hands full. Poor Trump. Feel bad for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing he said most is he wants both wars over by January 20th.
That's not. Yeah, I don't know how that's going to happen, but
right.
I would like that too.
But I think if the Russians' claims of what this Oreshnik can do is as well as Sarmat, I mean, these hypersonic missiles, then the United States is no longer the strongest military power in the world. In fact, it's not a military power whatsoever. It can be crushed. It can be crushed in half an hour if they want to. So that is going to cause a reaction. And what's the reaction going to be? I don't know.
Coup in South Korea to get them fully manufacturing because we don't have an industrial base.
Yeah, possibly.
Consolidating the Middle East under Israel, and as a U.S. protectorate, and controlling all of those resources. That would hurt China.
But how long can the American government keep spending all this money since the deficit is chewing up almost as much as the military budget now and interest payment? How many months or years can this keep going on, this Ponzi game where they keep spending money they don't have? Taking every dime out of the treasury and throwing it away on weapons, which is not productive. And how can you make America, United States great again when you're just throwing money away instead of using it to construct things and build things?
I think the answer to that is as long as the dollar will hold. Right.
Yeah. So his threat against the BRICS to punish them if they keep trying to de-dollarize. And their reaction is, okay, well, to that threat, even more we're going to de-dollarize. What do you want from us? This is, I mean,
so 85% of global transactions are still conducted in the U.S. dollar. So we still have a huge share of, global economic activity. So we're very powerful, but the trajectory is that power is declining. But I expect, will last for years and more decades, because we have the printing press, right? We can print the US dollar, and that's what we've been doing. And that's going to last as long as we have a preponderance of, nation states that are subservient to us. And so the more we can, the axis of resistance can peel these states away from the US, the better. But, I can definitely see, this kind of system could continue in perpetuity if the West can overthrow these huge powers that are resisting Western hegemony. And so that's what they're trying to do. I don't think they can do it.
I don't think it perpetuity. No, it's going down.
No, well, when I say perpetuity, I mean, it's disaster capitalism, where we designate a sacrifice zone. Everybody suffers there, and the bankers come and exploit things and prolong the system, right? So we can always, as long as we can pick and choose which areas of the planet are going to, be sacrificed, for the interest. So we can always do that in perpetuity. And is that good for humanity? Does that limit progress? It doesn't. And so that's the whole point of resistance, because there's a better approach to global governance, than the predatory capitalism. But I think, predatory capitalists can decide who the prey is going to be, exploit them, and maintain the system just like they've been for 75 years. But there's resistance to that because nobody wants to be designated as the person that gets sacrificed. So China doesn't want to be sacrificed like they were for 100 years. Russia is done sacrificing. They've sacrificed. So there's resistance to this system. But
well, we got Lindsey Graham. Lavrov mentioned this with Tucker Carlson. That Lindsey Graham was in Kiev a few days ago and stated the real reason for the war, that they want the riches of Ukraine. That's the real reason they're there.
Yeah.
And that's why they want to destroy Russia. That's the real reason they want to destroy Russia, because they want to take over all the minerals and resources that Russia has.
No, I think China. Russia is the most resource-rich country on the planet. I mean, they're the largest country, so it does kind of make sense.
Well, Canada has much the same thing, but they already own us, so they don't need to go to war with us. They control us in other ways. But Russia, yeah, that's the real reason. Same as Hitler had. They haven't changed the motivation why they want to destroy Russia.
And the crisis that you're referring to that is leading to the decline of the empire, one proposed answer is neo-colonizing Russia again, like the 90s.
Exactly. So
the added benefit of taking over all of Russia's resources is that it leaves China isolated. So
exactly. So we can expect the war with Russia to continue. This, even if they're defeated physically in Ukraine, this war against Russia is not going to end. It'll switch to a different phase. As we see, they can switch the focus to attacking Russia through the south, in the Caucasus again, through Syria, through Iran. If they took Iran, they would. Georgia. Like they did with the Chechen War in the 90s. That was very, very bad for Russia. I mean, that was a terrible war for Russia that was NATO supported.
Zelensky said this morning that he's willing to, work out a peace where the Ukraine is right now relegated to the geographic area that Ukraine controls, which gives Russia all these things. But he says, and then we'll have a peace. We'll freeze the hot war. And then diplomatically, we will return these other provinces. And that's what he's saying is the capitalist class lives forever, and we will never normalize relations with Russia.
Exactly.
And we will just continue in this situation of Cold War and hostility toward them. Not a hot war, but hostility. We will, dream up ways to destroy them over the decades. And eventually we'll have another perestroika moment where they will capitulate and we will conquer them. And so that's really the strategy. And it's how the capitalist class operates. And it's one of the problems with capitalism. Thankfully, China will, hopefully usher in a new paradigm of global governance and a new way of behaving, much better and improved way.
Well, when I was in Belgrade, this conference, there were people from Syria, Iran, Russia, of course, a guy from China, Brazil. But a couple of Russian officials, one man, Primakov, who was the son of the former foreign minister of Russia, gave a speech in which he apologized to the Serbs, the Yugoslavs, for Russia not doing anything to help them during 1999, that attack. Because he said, we're under the Yeltsin, and that was an American-controlled government, basically. But even after that, he said, we were very naive, extremely naive. We trusted the West. We shouldn't have done it. We made many mistakes, but they're never going to happen again. We're at war with the United States, and we are going to defeat them because we cannot be defeated. We can't, we'll cease to exist if we lose this war. So we have to win it, which means the Americans have to be defeated. And that's going to take place militarily. That's where we're going. And that's why it's so dangerous, because the American government and military know that. It's going to come down to an all-out battle, I think, at some point. Because I don't see the Americans doing what the British did when their empire fell apart in the 60s. And all the colonies were lost after India. In 10 years, they're all gone. Britain was reduced to what it is now. Britain accepted its royal wealth, sort of. It still claims to be something, but it didn't start a whole bunch of wars to try and maintain control of India, which they could have done. They just let it go because they were bankrupt. The United States is in a similar situation, but I don't see them accepting their reduced role now. Say, okay, let's just pull back our bases, save some money, and reestablish.
I mean, the Suez Canal crisis.
Exactly.
They had to have that before they did.
Britain and France wanted to take control of that, and the Americans stopped that. But that was their last pretense of a major, well, I guess the Ukraine war is them trying to throw their weight around still. But it's a joke. I mean, but I don't see the American establishment accepting a lesser role at all. It's just the whole mindset is seems to us really just poured into the genes of the government there that they got to dominate the world or else.
I mean, no more than the British.
Right? No, I agree because I'm English. I was a proud when I was a boy. We used to have a big map in school of the whole world. We're basically red. We controlled it. We were very proud of that as little boys because I didn't understand anything. But in 10 years, it was all gone. It's all gone. And Britain now, I mean, the British Army couldn't even take it. If the IRA becomes active again, they couldn't even deal with that. And they could become active again.
Yeah, so it's great to hear Primakov's, being clear-eyed about reality, because definitely with Gorbachev and Yeltsin, they were naive, they were duped, and it was a catastrophe for humanity. But yeah, so Russia, China, Iran, these countries need to understand that there's strength in unity. And I think the U.S. is going to try very hard to peel those off. So I think Trump will probably offer Russia, hey, we'll end the sanctions, we'll normalize relations. You just have to back us in our war against China. And I think that's preposterous. Like if Trump thinks that's possible, he's really confused. But I think that's going to be on the agenda. And that does get us back to Syria a little bit, because, Iran would be the weakest link, and Iran is a lot weaker without, control of Syria. So that's going to be what I'm watching very closely these next few days, and hoping that we see some movement to do like what happened last time, because like we said, last time in 2011, all these same cities were overrun, and eventually they were pushed back by a combined effort of Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia. And so I'm very hopeful that the same thing will happen. And if it doesn't, it's definitely not going to be good for Iran. Should we even speculate what that would mean for the bigger picture?
I don't think Iran has existential threat for it. It's more for the Hezbollah is most at risk by this.
Right.
And the Palestinians.
And Iran is still planning, and they still claim that they're going to hit Israel big time. That attack is still being arranged.
Yeah. No, that'll be interesting to see if.
And then the Russians, Lavrov said they're going to hit something with the Oreshnik again. They're going to use it again. So things are going to happen. It's not all going the West way. This is the propaganda is so intense. Every time one of these things blows up in Georgia or Syria or wherever, there's always this big hoopla about, oh, this is great, they're losing, they're being embarrassed, they look weak. And then a few days or weeks later, all peters out, like the Kursk operation. That was a big thing, and now they're just being destroyed there. So they caused a lot of chaos, but did they win in the end? Not really. I think things have totally changed from what it was 10 years ago when they first attacked Syria. Syria has more Arab support now, which it didn't have then at all. And yeah, it's bad, but
Syria
Iran
is weaker. But
and Israel itself is weaker. Syria is weak, obviously, but Israel itself his army is in bad shape. And we're still expecting this attack from Iran, which could do major damage. And what the Russians are going to do with the Oreshnik, where they're going to hit, who they're going to hit, is a big question.
Yeah, is that going to happen before the election? It'll be interesting.
Before Trump comes into power, I think so.
Yeah, I was wondering too.
The inauguration. I guess that would be the inauguration. Yeah.
Yeah, I think something will happen before that.
Other speculation is that they don't want to mess things up with Trump, and they're going to give Trump a chance and they're not going to do it. But yeah,
The
time will
Russians say
tell.
they don't care. They're not doing anything based on whether the government changes in the United States. They're just doing what they're going to do. They, from all the comments they've seen from Lavrov and Putin and other officials in Russia, is we know Trump. We know what he did before. It's not going to be any different. We're just going to do what we're going to do because you guys aren't listening to us, no matter who you are.
Right, because the long-range Western missiles targeted and probably fired by U.S. servicemen, continue to hit Russia,
Yeah.
and that happened after the first Oreshnik launch or attack.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Greg.
About 10 years ago, I heard Putin first say that he understands it doesn't matter who runs the U.S. too.
That's right.
That's been their clear line, and whenever they're asked, "Do you want Trump? Do you want the Democrats, the Republicans?" That's what they always say is, the head of state changes and the policies stay the same, and that's so true.
Well, the other thing at the conference, which everybody agreed on, was that the attack on Yugoslavia was one of the first phases of the war, the attack on Russia, because Hitler had to eliminate Yugoslavia in 1941 and Greece as well, because British troops were there. Before he could attack Russia or the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa, he had to get rid of the potential weak attack from his flank, southern flank. They had to get rid of. So they did the same. They destroyed Yugoslavia over 10 years and finally occupied it. And that was the first phase and built Camp Bondsteel because they intended then to attack Russia. And that was why NATO, everybody talks as if NATO just expanded east because they wanted to have more club fees for more club members. I mean, it's just stupid. There was a purpose for moving east. It was to attack Russia. That's the only purpose for that. And Russians know that. They're not provocations. This is aggression. But people say it's a provocation. No, it's a direct act of aggression. When you move if Warsaw Pact had not failed and had expanded west, what would the Americans think? They occupied Canada. Now Canada's a member of the Warsaw Pact. Mexico. Mm-hmm. Well, why is that happening? Because Russia wants to attack the United States. That's why. But no, it's this whole thing is a defensive alliance, and it's just they just wanted to. Even Lavrov said this, as I thought a bit strange, but he even said, "Oh, NATO's doing this because they want to justify its existence." No, NATO's sole purpose for its existence was always to attack the Soviet Union and bring it down. First, as communists to get rid of socialism as an example, and then take over the entire state and destroy it. And this is still their purpose. It always was their purpose. It's not just to justify the existence of NATO. This is naive. It's childish.
It's the inexorable drive, total global hegemony, by the Western capitalist class, and it's right. There's no stopping it. I mean, as long as they think they have the power to do it, they're going to keep trying and trying and trying. And so, balkanizing Russia, breaking it up to 100 statelets, and raping all the resources and the labor force. That's precisely the agenda. And there's no escaping that agenda as long as Russia is sovereign and says, "Hey, we're not your puppet." As long as they're not going to be a vassal, we're going to be trying to attack them. And so, but that's going to change because the U.S. is just not going to be the global hegemon like they were for 75 years, and especially after 1991 when the Soviet Union dismantled itself. But
it's an interesting legal question. The Soviet Union was never legally dissolved. There was a mechanism to dissolve it under the USSR Constitution, but it was not followed. In fact, USSR still legally exists, but de facto other structures have been built on top of that historical fact. And Ukraine was never, there was the trouble with Putin and blaming Lenin for creating Ukraine in the first place. Well, it wasn't a problem as long as the Soviet Union existed. It was just administrative internal arrangement for easier administration purposes. To say there was a mistake is nonsense. In the historical context, it made great sense to do that.
Right.
So, in fact, the only problem with Ukraine came because of the capitalist counter-revolution in 1991. It's the capitalists that created this problem, that took over Russia, not the communists. Mm-hmm. And that has to be understood by people. The capitalists created this problem in Russia, not the communists. So I don't agree with Putin on that. And I think so. I'm not sure if Zyuganov keeps reminding him of that or not, but he should.
I haven't heard him blame Lenin in a while. Have you?
No, he's toned down on that. Well,
Yeah.
because I'm not sure if we talked about this before, but it's come up in just other programs. But one of the ironies of Russia's situation now, the capitalist government, or semi-capitalist, it's not totally capitalist, but
Right.
is that its main allies are communist states, or Russia, DPRK,
Mhm.
Islamic socialism in Iran, Venezuela, sort of socialist, semi-socialist, Laos, Vietnam, Cuba. All its allies are socialist or communist states, and that must have an influence on their thinking. And they've gone back to renationalize certain defense industries and other industries. Certain other things have never been privatized. And he keeps talking now in his speeches about the most important people in the country are workers and the soldiers who protect the workers. He would sound like a socialist if I didn't know him better. But since he
Right,
was a
and he
colonel in the
blames Ukraine
KGB,
now.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm saying because he was a colonel in the KGB, he had to be vetted to be at least they thought he was solid Marxist to rise to that rank, and maybe he wasn't. But he knows Marxism. He read it. He understands it. And they seem to be surviving these sanctions by using some of the old Soviet economic models and mechanisms which the Soviet Union, the socialists used. They've gone back to those.
Right,
So
even
it's
some
it's
planning.
very interesting phenomenon that's taking place in Russia that maybe they're swinging back more. Well, I've said this before to Billy Bob, maybe he's bored with this, but yeah, I don't think you've heard it. In a meeting February a year ago, Kremlin, all the parties were called in to meet Putin after the some election or something. And they all said what they thought of the country. And then Zyuganov was asked what he thought. And he said to Putin, well, comrade, don't you think it's time that we went back to some basic socialist principles? And I expected him to say, well, comrade, we tried that. Doesn't really work.
Yeah.
But he didn't say that. He said, that's a very good idea. We should study that intensely. That surprised me. Now, I don't know if it's just bullshit, but he could have said to Zyuganov, no, man, we've tried that, man, But thanks, but no thanks. But he didn't say that.
Right.
He said the opposite. So I don't know what that means, but that's something.
Well, the national interest in Russia is so clear that it unites all the classes, right? So they told the oligarchs that were pro-Western, get out. We don't want you here.
No.
And so the oligarchs that remain are definitely, anti-West. And Putin is a good manager. Like, he manages the facts. So he's a good manager of his biggest opposition is the communists. The communists are his biggest political opposition. Right. And then you also do have the wealthy elites, the oligarchs that are also a faction within the government. And so Putin manages these factions. He does a really good job. And he did nationalize the oil and natural gas sector. His college dissertation was written on, nationalizing the crown jewels of the state and using that nationalization to stabilize the economy. Because obviously after the collapse or after the dismantling of the Soviet Union, it was a basket case. Everybody knows that life expectancy plummeted and drug abuse went up and prostitution and unemployment all skyrocketed. And so to stabilize the economy, he said we need to nationalize the oil and natural gas sectors, which is exactly what he did when he came to power. And it did help to a great extent. So yeah, socialist principles and managing all the different factions. It's, China does a similar thing, but China has a communist party in charge, but they govern kind of the same way. They tolerate the oligarchs. The oligarchs work on behalf of the party, the 5-year economic plans as laid out by the party, but they're allowed to get ridiculously, obscenely wealthy. And there's more billionaires being, created in China probably than there are in the United States on a daily basis. But they do not control the government. And that's one of the differences, in the West, of course, the oligarchs own the government and both political parties. But in China, the oligarchs are subservient to the dictates of the party in power. Right. So, the same thing as in Russia, right? Putin has the power in Russia, and he can, tell the oligarchs, hey, you sign this paper and give, what wasn't that like a thing? Like, there was a broadcast in Russia a while ago, and he went to some village that these oligarchs were exploiting, or they were trying to close down the industry there because it wasn't profitable. And Putin came in and made a big propaganda coup by supporting the workers and
the
like
aluminum
forcing.
plant.
Yeah,
Effect.
exactly.
So
They
you know
did.
my reference. So
Yeah.
it's it's not perfect, but it's something we can support as socialists.
Yeah, and it was when the communist, Zyuganov was pressing Putin to recognize the Donbass and Lugansk republics
Yeah.
several weeks before, and pressing for Russian troops to go in, and finally Putin went along with it because of circumstances. But so that he has, although the communists are the largest opposition party, in large parts they support the present policies, because I think they must see that. Well, they haven't gone totally capitalist here yet, and hopefully won't.
Well,
I think
that
there's
would
more
just
of
be
the
selling out.
economy. I was going to say, I think there's more of the economy owned by the state in Russia than there is in China now.
Yeah, maybe so.
I'll bet you that'll change if China gets into a hot war.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, people say
Right.
the communists run the best capitalist country in China, but the point is, I think that Marx would approve in this way that when he was asked what would a communist society look like, I have no idea what workers will do if they take power. Well, as Billy Bob says, it may be capitalist in many ways, but the workers are in charge of it through the Communist Party. They decide how far things can go and what can be done. Whereas in the West, the capitalists and financiers are in charge of the economy. They decide what gets done. So who knows what a communist society would look like? It would still have capitalist aspects to it. Probably so. We still have feudal aspects to the capitalist economy 500 years later. So I think it's a long, long, long process. So,
and I think there's no dogmatism in Marxism, right? It's like if it's working, if it benefits the people,
right.
That's what we're going to do. There's no dogma. And so a lot of, the Western leftists say China's not socialist. They didn't just dogmatically abolish all private ownership of industry. And and so those people don't understand Marxism. And, that would have been devastating. That would have been awful for the workers if the Chinese Communist Party would have just, done the dogmatic Marxist thing and just abolished all of private ownership. So you would have lost out on. What's that?
They did.
Well, they did in the 50s, 60s, yeah. Then
they
loosened up
undid
again.
it. It wasn't devastating.
So, what happened was you had the Sino-Soviet split and you had the Western trade embargo, which forced Mao into an economy of self-sufficiency. So Mao, as early as 1945, was saying, we want more capitalism. We want to trade with the West. I mean, this is going to be good for humanity. And I mean, I could pull up a quote, but he was forced into this economy of self-sufficiency. And then obviously there was resistance to open up to reform. But thankfully, the Communist Party did the right thing. And Deng Xiaoping was obviously correct in pursuing. But what Deng Xiaoping pursued was what it really, it was the same policy that was articulated by Mao in 1945. And I could share that quote. There's a lot of quotes about how, we need more capitalism in China. And so anyway, it allowed China to access Western technology, Western markets, and obviously the trillions of direct Western investment. These are all things that were good for workers, and the Communist Party has been able to manage appropriately. Now, the West had hoped they would be able to take over the government politically through the economy. They could infiltrate the economy and then infiltrate the government and then overthrow the CPC. And so we saw Tiananmen Square, that was one of the earliest color revolutions that failed. But I mean, this was the hope. And the West is now realizing, shit, we fucked up. We ended our, trade embargo. We allowed the China to join the WTO. And then since then, China has just they've just exploded economically. And now they're a threat to us. Now we're going to have to renew the embargo. So they're looking for an excuse to initiate a trade embargo. They're looking for an excuse to interdict all of China's trade routes through the Malacca Straits, through the South China Sea. That's the plan. That's how the whole Marine Corps has been geared towards getting rid of armor and using missiles, ATACMS, to interdict shipping routes. So that's what the strategists have planned for the next 4 years, re-implementing an embargo against China, using the South China Sea or Taiwan as a flashpoint. But again, this is all silly. None of this is going to succeed. But it's the grand strategy of the West, and it's a failed strategy. And I think we're going to see that out. If they pull the trigger on it, they're going to fail, and they probably won't even pull the trigger on it because they'll see that it's hopeless. Is my guess.
Right.
I've been grandstanding a lot, Chris. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Should we wrap it up, or do you want?
Yeah, we're coming close to 2:00. I got to go soon, but yeah.
So,
one last comment about Taiwan. I mean, the confusion people have is they say the American government supports the one China policy, but treats Taiwan like it's a separate country by arming it and so on. But there's no contradiction because they see the former Kuomintang faction, which put itself into Taiwan in 1949 as a legitimate government. They want to overthrow, as Lindsey Graham, we want to overthrow the Communist Party of China. That's the main enemy, not China, not the Chinese people, the Chinese Communist Party. And so they want Taiwan to be part of China. Otherwise, if it's a separate country, it has no right to rule China. But they want the people in Taiwan to take over the government in Beijing. Those capitalists, they want them to enter. And they're using them as a Trojan horse inside China, because Taiwan's part of China, to try and overthrow the communist government. And then they'll just break it up into pieces as they did before 100 years ago. So there is no contradiction. That's why they maintain a one country policy, but treat Taiwan as if it is the legitimate government of China, not Beijing.
Yeah, and until Kissinger and Nixon went to China in 1971, the U.S. did say that KMT was the legitimate government. But then after 71, they agreed that the CPC is the legitimate government, and they agreed that Taiwan is part of China. And so
that's right.
On paper.
They're going to have to go against their own understanding and their own agreements if they're going to, initiate some kind of a thing there. But I mean, of course they will. I remember my whole point. I launched into this big rant, and then I forgot my point halfway through the rant, and I kept ranting. But it was just about the lack of dogmatism. So I don't think Marxism is dogma. I think that this idea that we're going to abolish abolish private ownership of industries. I think, again, that can continue as long as it is beneficial for the workers. But I think, like China is proving, that there is benefit from harnessing an aspect of capitalism within your economy, as long as the political party, the political power is not threatened by the oligarchs. And it's dangerous, right? It's dangerous because the oligarchs can always gain power and try and do a counter revolution and take over the government. But if you can manage that, I mean, and you're a developing economy, there might be good reasons to maintain private ownership of the means of production. So I don't see Marxism anymore as a dogmatic thing that we're going to abolish all private ownership, at least for hundreds of years. And after we have, it's possible that in the future that, we could get to a point where we have enough abundance and where private ownership is really a detriment to the workers. And at that point, it would just make sense. But, all the capitalists are scared of communism because they think, well, capitalism is good for workers, and so we can't abolish it. And so the Western Marxists that preach the immediate abolition of capitalism, I think, are scaring people from embracing an ideology that otherwise they would be okay with, because I don't think we're about immediately abolishing capitalism. We're about taking political power away from the oligarchs and putting it in the hands of the working class. And I think China is demonstrating that, how superior that approach is. And I think...
or even Lenin did that in 19...
Yeah, the NEP.
21-23, it was a new economic program.
Yeah.
I mean...
I want to reframe a little bit. This is
Okay.
right-wing
Chris,
communism.
if you need to leave, Chris,
I can say another 5. I want to hear Greg as well. This is pretty good.
Okay, yeah, I just want to reframe this as right-wing communism, and it's a move that makes sense under severe duress, right? I mean, it was after Russia was wrecked, and with China, it was, as you said, a result of the Sino-Soviet split. These are compromises. I think, people like communism and Marxism to get rid of capitalism. They don't want to be sentenced to it for hundreds of years. And, the capitalism has really bad effects: wealth disparity, pollution, corruption, right? So, I mean, it's, I think it's a compromise and a practical solution to some problems, but I don't want to hold it up as an ideal. That's what we're trying to get rid of.
No, and for sure. And I know you're not accusing me of doing that.
No.
because I feel I certainly wasn't doing that.
No, I know you're anti-capitalist.
Yeah. But I do have this great quote.
Well, even when I was in North Korea, I mean, that's probably, with Cuba, maybe one of the most solidly communist countries I've been to. And there's no private mass production. It's all government, state, or worker owned. But they do have small shops, which are privately owned, restaurants. Artists sell their wares privately.
Yeah.
So
So,
I mean,
Soviet
Marxists
Union
were never
had
against you
businesses
doing your
too.
own thing. But as long as the means of production, that is the mass means which produce the wealth, the benefits of life for the people, are under workers' control, that's the main thing. How that control is affected, well, that can vary depending on the circumstances, I suppose.
So the material conditions that exist ought to determine the policy. And so we shouldn't approach things dogmatically. We need to look at the material conditions, and we need to apply the policy that maximizes the benefit for the working class, for the majority of people. And there's a lot of experimentation to do. There's a lot of, what works in China might not work here. And so, I want to kind of avoid, thinking of socialism as you take power so that you can immediately abolish capitalism. Because, if China would have done that, they wouldn't have been able to be where they are today. They wouldn't have had access to Western markets. They wouldn't have access to direct Western investment. So you got to look at the material conditions, and you got to, adopt the policy that's going to benefit the majority of the people. And so this was in the best interest of the working class to allow Western private corporations to come and invest and exploit China's workforce. Like, that was good for China's workforce. So certain conditions, that's going to be the appropriate thing to do. And just like in the United States, if it's not going to be in the best interest for us to, immediately abolish, family-owned restaurants, we're not going to do it, So, and if, and we're not going to try and take your farm and collectivize it. These are just things that I know I've talked to idiot libertarians, these moronic, mindless people, and I'm trying to explain to them, what communism is and how, no, you don't understand. You think it opposes your interests, but it is your interest. It is in your interest. And so I think sometimes talking to their indoctrination, their indoctrinated mind, this approach that, socialism is the dogmatic abolition of private ownership, just isn't a good approach. I mean, it's very, I don't want to condemn people for pushing that idea. But I do know that it can be counterproductive in dealing with the kinds of indoctrinations that exists in the West. And so if we're going to help people to understand why socialism is in their own interest, maybe focus on the pragmatic aspects of Marxism. But okay, you guys are very good listeners. I think we will, let's reconvene on another day. I know my blood sugar is low. So thanks, Greg, and thanks, Chris. And we will definitely have both of you guys back very soon.
All right. You take care.
Thank you, Billy.
Okay, bye.
Nice to meet you. Great.
Likewise.